Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give it a minute, let everyone filter in from the waiting room, and then we will get started here shortly. Thank you for joining us. Just going to give it a couple more seconds because people are still getting in from the waiting room, and then we will get started shortly. Okay, looks like things have leveled off, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, good morning. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Kelsey Erickson Streufert. I am lucky enough to be the TRA's Chief Public Affairs Officer, so I handle government affairs, lobbying, PR, and educational events like this one, which I'm really excited about. In the background, running tech for us is Erica, our advocacy manager. Thank you, Erica, for keeping us on track here. And then I'm joined by Josh Alexander from the TABC. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself in a minute. But before I do that, just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, I'm a lawyer, so I have to do the legal debrief that this is not officially legal advice. It's really meant to be educational and guidance. And if you ever have a question about how the rules apply to your specific situation, please reach out to me. Please reach out to the TABC. We want to make sure you have accurate and thorough information on such an important topic. Also, please make this interactive. If you have questions or comments or you get confused about something, drop us a line. We've got the chat feature turned on as well as the Q&A. The Q&A is a great feature specifically for questions because we can type answers. We can let you know that it was answered live. So please use those throughout this presentation. Erica and I will be monitoring those, and we will make sure we get through as many of those questions as possible. We are also recording this webinar, so if you miss something or if you want to share it with your team, which is a great idea on something like this, just reach out to us. We'll make sure you get the link. We'll also share the recording with everyone who registered. Normally, these webinars are restricted to our TRA members. They're really a member exclusive benefit. But this topic is so important and so timely that we wanted to make sure it was available to all of the operators across the state. But I still have to do my member plug and say that if you're not currently a member of the TRA or you're not sure if you're a member, please reach out to us and consider joining. We do educational events like this at least once a month on lots of different topics. We also advocate for the industry at the legislature and Congress with our agencies. And so the benefits really go on and on. It's truly an investment, not only in your individual business, but also in the strength and security of our industry moving forward. So with that, I think I covered all of the sort of opening items. Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask you to say hello and introduce yourself.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. Good morning. As Kelsey mentioned, my name is Joshua Alexander. I'm the director of our audit and investigations team here within Regulatory Affairs Division with TABC. And again, this morning, I'll be going over just a brief presentation to discuss laws surrounding alcohol-to-go sales. And I'd like to personally thank each of you for participating this morning. As you know, ensuring alcohol safety for all Texans requires a partnership between the Commission and all of our industry partners. This means the responsibility is all of ours, of course, right, to be aware of the laws and to promote safe and responsible alcohol sale and service in each of our roles. So today I hope to pretty much just reiterate this morning what's expected of retail establishments when selling alcohol to go and or delivering to customers. I will also point out some common mistakes that we've seen during compliance operations throughout the state. And we feel, wholeheartedly that most of these issues can be corrected with the proper education. And so with that, Kelsey, if you don't have anything else, I'm prepared to jump right into the presentation.
Let me just back up real fast. Thank you, Josh, so much. And thank you for joining us today. And I love what you said about, this responsibility falls to all of us. And we are so grateful for the relationship that we have with the TABC, where we can do these events and these educational opportunities. So thank you. I want to just back up really fast and kind of remind everyone how we got here, right? Because Alcohol to Go was truly a product of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I speak for myself and probably many others when I say that those early days of the pandemic are quite a blur when we look back. I hope we don't encounter anything like that again in our lives, because it was truly surreal. But Alcohol to Go was one of the good things that came out of the pandemic. And we're really proud of the fact that the TRA was able to really lead the advocacy efforts to create Alcohol to Go. And you might forget that the versions of Alcohol to Go, the specific rules and what you could and couldn't do evolved as the process went on. So first, during those early days of the pandemic, when all we were doing was really to go business, we went to Governor Abbott and we got an emergency waiver of some of the rules that had prohibited Alcohol to Go. And that waiver was a little more limited, right? You couldn't do cocktails to go, for example. You had to do sort of cocktail kits, where you had the little mini airplane bottles with the mixers, with the garnishes. And then we heard from operators that that really wasn't meeting the need, that there were more opportunities that we could explore and explore safely. And so then we were able to go back to Governor Abbott. He agreed with us after a lot of discussion and back and forth. And so then we were able to add cocktails to go. But again, it was still that emergency waiver. And so then when the legislature met in 2021, we had an opportunity to make those rules permanent and ensure that restaurants always had this option, even when we weren't in an emergency situation like COVID. I say all that because at each step in that process, the rules changed a little bit, right? The packaging rules, the labeling rules, the type of alcohol you could provide, it evolved as our advocacy evolved. And so now that we're over 2 years out from that law becoming permanent and getting signed into law by Governor Abbott, really think it's important to talk to TABC to make sure that everyone is really clear on what those current rules are, regardless of what came before, right? Regardless of what you've heard you could do, regardless of what you've seen other people do, we've got to make sure we're really clear on what the laws are now. And I think it's important to just point out that Alcohol to Go is not something we can sort of take for granted. It's truly an opportunity, a privilege, and I think something that as an industry we have to take really seriously so that we have that privilege moving forward and we're providing this customer benefit in a safe way. Many of y'all know that the TRA works closely with our restaurant association partners in other states. We are still seeing states either get rid of Alcohol to Go or not make it permanent. So this really is something that we can't take for granted. We need to make sure that we're good stewards of this opportunity. And also, I think we just need to make sure that we're protecting our businesses, our employees, and our customers, right? I occasionally get those calls from a restaurant who had, maybe a young hostess who got busy, forgot to check IDs. Suddenly she's sold alcohol to a minor and now she's going to jail for the night, right? I mean, this is serious stuff. And so I just want to start off by sort of underscoring that responsibility, not to scare anyone, but just to reiterate that we've got to take this seriously. And the good news is we're going to work really closely with TABC to provide the resources you need to make sure you understand the rules and are able to do it safely and effectively. So in addition to today's webinar, which we're recording, we're also going to have some one-pagers, really easy to kind of digest, remember, remind yourselves and your employees what those rules are. So stay tuned for those. And again, if you have any questions, if you ever are unclear on the rules, please reach out. This is not meant to be punitive or have a gotcha moment. It's really to make sure everyone understands the rules and best practices. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox and I will turn it over to Josh for the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelsey. And just so you know, I know we may have comments I won't be monitoring those as I'm going through the presentation, Kelsey. So if we do get something that we feel needs to be addressed here, I know we'll have a moment at the end of the presentation for Q&A as well. But feel free again. I mean, if I need to be interrupted here to clarify something or answer any questions, Kelsey, if you guys can just monitor that chat for me, I'll be glad to stop and we can address those questions at that time.
Absolutely, Josh. We'll be monitoring as we go.
Awesome. All righty. Well, let's begin the presentation off just by discussing, how alcohol can be moved throughout, the premises of the various on-premise retail accounts. So when you think about mixed beverage holders and private club registration permits, generally those authorizations are the same. As Kelsey mentioned, prior to COVID, customers could not, enter those establishments with alcohol and could not leave the establishments with alcohol, with the exception of, a bottle of wine that was, ordered with the purchase of food. And so now, as we move forward after, 21, right, we have alcohol to go, and essentially that allowed the mixed beverage and private club holders to offer those alcohol to go with, certain requirements. And so we'll get into those requirements, in the future slides. But in addition to that, mixed beverages with, brew pub licenses can allow customers to leave with malt beverages that, were produced on the premise. As well as in certain instances where there are, public sidewalks there at the premise, restaurants can also offer alcohol to those customers on the public sidewalks there, unless, there's some ordinance, by the local municipalities there that would prohibit the service of alcohol on those public sidewalks. And so as we move into wine and malt beverage retailers, which, authorize the sale of wine and malt beverages, and then also retail dealers licenses, which offer just the sale of malt beverages, those provisions are the same with regard to customers that that are allowed essentially to bring alcohol on the premise, as well as they can leave with alcohol. And again, that authority existed, before any of the to-go law, changes occurred. And so essentially what we need to remember here is if, the business chooses to allow for customers to, BYOB or bring their own beverages, it's important to know that the business themselves and their employees should not be pouring alcohol or storing alcohol, handling it for the customer. Essentially, the customers serving themselves, but it does not prohibit or prevent the business from charging a corkage fee or, setup fee for, the cups, glasses, etc. And that, again, is consistent with both the wine and malt beverage retailers permit as well as the retail dealer's on-premise license. Now, in terms of eligibilities and what the alcohol to go orders should look like here, we've provided in this presentation or this slide the mixed beverage and private club permits must have a food and beverage certificate with TABC and offer food orders, with those alcohol to go sales. And that's a requirement exclusively for those two permits, while the wine and malt beverage retailers permit and the retail dealer's on-premise license do not require the sale of food with those alcohol to go orders. It's important to just remind everyone that, in the law that requires food to be sold with alcohol to go orders, on the mixed beverage and private club permits, food was not defined, and so appetizers count. And we really don't have a set of specific criteria in the law as to what that food looks like. So as long as we're preparing and have some food available with that order, then it would meet the requirements for the to-go eligibility. Now, packaging in terms of the mixed beverage and private clubs, those packages should be sealed by the manufacturer. If it's distilled spirits and you're not selling mixed drinks, then obviously the limitation on the size remains, as Kelsey mentioned earlier, the little 375 milliliters, or if you choose to do the mixed drinks, it has to be sealed at the retail level, and there's some guidance there given in the law and our rules that help to define somewhat what a tamper-proof package looks like. And so if you look here, they've provided the language, sealed inside a bag or closed with a zip tie or staple, shrink wrap or some other similar packaging, as well as the tamper evident adhesive tape. Or it could be sealed mechanically on premise with a can seamer. And the most important, to finish that off here, and again, to note that this isn't an exhaustive list, these are just a few examples of the ways that you could seal the product. You also need to finish that packaging with a label that has the business name and an indication that the product is an alcoholic beverage. I can tell you from our efforts, in reviewing compliance, that last mile effort is what many businesses are lacking when they're, participating in the to-go sales. Sometimes they get the sealing right, but then you don't have, the name of the business on the package, and you don't have the indication that it's alcoholic beverages. And that alone, makes you out of compliance with the law requirements. And for beer and wine, Kelsey, do we have a question?
We do. We actually have two great questions. First is there a maximum drink size on retailer sealed containers?
No, the only actual size limitation is if you're selling, the manufacturer, sealed spirits, right? And that's going to be on the 375 milliliter limitation. So if you're mixing a drink, the law does not, provide a size, limitation there.
Perfect. And then we have a couple others. As far as buying with food, is there a limit? In other words, is there a ratio of drinks to food that you have to comply with?
No, ma'am. There's no, in the law, there's no current ratio food to alcohol for, the to-go sales either. So as long as you have some food, you can sell, how much ever alcohol customer purchases.
Perfect. And then, oh, good. Questions are flooding in. I like it. Then we have, does wine ordered with food and then taken home have to be sealed and labeled, or is it sealed different? That's a great question because it is kind of an exception to the rules, right?
Absolutely. And again, we kind of talk about the pre-COVID, none of that changed with regard to the wine sales. And so if we're doing to-go sales, that's going to be a little bit different. And I'm assuming that we're talking about not the wine purchased with food. I'm assuming that we're just talking about if they order a bottle of wine for to-go, right? That's not.
No, I think, Josh, what they're talking about is if they open a bottle of wine at dinner with, if they're eating on site, open a bottle of wine with dinner and then don't finish it, right? Russell, chat again if that's wrong, but I think that's the question you're asking.
Okay, perfect. So that existing law didn't require or, didn't, give any kind of direction for how that has to be labeled or packaged. And in fact, it was simply if you order a bottle of wine and that wine's opened, you order that with food. The previous laws allowed you to, recork that wine back up and take it with the food. So there's no packaging requirements or labeling requirements in that regard.
Perfect. Yep, Russell, perfect. Thank you. And then Tracy this is a good question too. Tracy said, do you have to specifically use the phrase alcoholic beverage, or can it say margarita or some other, rum and coke, something like that?
Right. And so again, if we're just sticking to the letter of the law, and sometimes as we know with legislation and, there's intent, and then, there's kind of reading, what the words say. And so the way the law reads is it has to indicate that it's an alcoholic beverage. So I think that we would look at a scenario where it says margarita, and the things, how we interpret what margarita means, right? And so there are, I guess, in some instances there can be, non-alcoholic margaritas, or some people may call those, other names. And so what I would say there is, I would like to include the term alcohol somewhere there. It doesn't necessarily have to be alcoholic beverages. I mean, it could be, quotations alcohol, but, again, it would be subject to interpretation, right? If you just put the margarita on there, then I think common sense, we would assume that there's alcohol there. But again, just be mindful, that there are different, terminologies used for, various beverages or whatever, and to cover yourselves in a restaurant to the letter of the law, I would just try to include the term alcohol somewhere on the package if we can.
I agree with that, Josh. And I would also say, I actually recently heard a really sad story about, this is kind of random, but a bus driver who was drinking White Claw, and they didn't realize that had alcohol in it. And part of that was a language barrier. This person didn't speak English very well. And so while we may think it's obvious what a margarita is, I think this is one of those cases, better to be careful, better to be safe, and make sure, as Josh said, you're protecting your business. But really great question. Josh, we have a few more here too. This slide's kind of the meat and potatoes, so I'm not surprised and excited. We've got some questions. Someone asked, is a business logo sufficient for the label, or does the label also have to have our business name?
Again, if there's any question about whether or not someone recognizes the logo, right, then I would say that it could fall out, when it's interpreted by, an agency staff member, right? So, I would venture to say that we need to have the trade name if we can. If, the logo has the name in it, then fine. But again, it just kind of goes back to that interpretation issue. Some logos are more recognizable than others, right? And so we don't want it to be a question if you get stopped by a law enforcement person and they don't recognize the label. You got to think about the intent of the law, which is for accountability purposes. We want to know where that package originated from. And so although the law doesn't really distinguish, it just says the business name should be on there, then I would say that we're more consistent with the law if we have the business name on it. That way there's no question, right? If it's Josh's Restaurant, then we know it came from Josh's Restaurant, as opposed to if my logo was a picture of a basketball, right? I mean, like, no one would know that came from Josh's, except for the folks who are familiar with Josh's Restaurant logo.
Right. Once you open up that restaurant, give us a call, Josh. We'll help get set up. Another good question: are snacks included as a food purchase, such as chips or crackers?
Yes, indeed. So as I mentioned, food, was not defined, in the language there. And so for us, any version of food, which includes appetizers, chips, dip, snacks, chips, salsa, all of those would, meet the criteria for food.
But has to be prepared on the premises, right? So I
Right.
wouldn't put a bag of Cheetos in there that you didn't prepare and call that a day. But to Josh's point, if you're preparing the salsa, doing something like that.
Right.
Does the label have to be on each individual alcohol item to go, or can it be generally on the outside packaging bag?
Yeah, and again, that goes back to the options that you have to package it. So, right, I mean, if you're just putting, two individual cups, right, that are sealed inside of a cup holder, then I would say both cups need to be labeled. But if you're going to put 2 or 3 cups inside of a bag and you're going to seal that bag, then that outside of that bag needs to be labeled.
Great. Here's another good one, a specific scenario. So if a consumer purchases food and non-alcoholic beverages and consumes on site, then they decide they would like to purchase an alcoholic beverage to go. When ringing that in, are we required to ring in another food item, even though they have already purchased food?
Right, and that's a very good question. And I would say, just being honest, that kind of falls in more of a gray area for the law, right? Because you're kind of combining your authority to sell alcohol on the premise with, kind of to-go sales, which, wasn't necessarily, I don't think that was contemplated, at the time. So the way I would say I'd look at that is, if there's some documentation, which is why we get into some of that, which you'll see in later slides, that require acknowledgement, signed receipt by the customer, and the restaurants are required to keep that documentation, to essentially show that there was food sold with the order, right? So if we can go back and trace that to a purchase that was made with food, and they're taking it alcohol to go, as long as it's packaged properly, et cetera, then I think you guys will be covered there.
Perfect. That is all the questions we have right now. So I think we can keep going through the slides.
Awesome. Okay. So I believe the last thing there that I didn't cover there was the wine and malt beverage retailers and the retail dealers on premise with regard to their requirement for the sealing the containers or what have you. Is they don't have the same requirement as the mixed beverage and private club, right? So those, if you're selling a cup of beer or whatever it is, they don't have the same requirements for sealing and labeling the products. And so just want to point that out there as well.
A few more questions came in, Josh.
All right.
I'm not entirely sure, Veronica, what you're going for here, but for a restaurant to purchase alcohol, do you still have to include food?
Depends
Veronica,
on what type of permit. I think if I'm answering it right, I mean, if you're a restaurant, we first have to determine, is it a private club restaurant and a mixed beverage permit there, or is it a wine and malt beverage, or just a retail dealers, right? Because there's different types of permits that they can have. And so if it's not a private club or mixed beverage, then the food requirement is not necessary.
Perfect. And then here's a good question. For the label, does the business name need to include the address information? For example, if they have multiple locations?
No, the law does not indicate that it has to show which location. It just says that it has to be the business name that it was purchased from, and the fact that it has alcohol on the package. So for us, again, that's why the law requires that you keep the documentation of the sale. So if it comes down to a question about, where it came from, et cetera, right, then we would try to get that, the documentation, that'll show that and confirm where they bought it.
Perfect. Then Here's one to clarify. If a customer buys a margarita dining in and wishes to take the drink to go that she didn't finish, so she's got half a margarita left, can the restaurant properly seal and package it for her so she can take it to go?
Yeah, again, I don't, that wasn't necessarily addressed, in the actual law, but what I would say there is if you can prove that she or the individual purchased that margarita with food, then I would say if it's properly packaged, labeled, then yeah, there's not going to be an issue there. If we can trace it back to a purchase that happened with food, then for me it'd be no different than me kind of pre-ordering a meal and a margarita, and I get to the restaurant and I decide to eat the food there and take the margarita with me, right? I mean, it'd be the same. You still bought food, with the alcohol. And I think as long as that's present and we can prove that, then I think we're okay there.
Great. And then someone asked about the alcoholic beverage label again. Do you have to say alcoholic beverage or what's specifically inside? The law just requires alcoholic beverage, so you don't have to worry about being more specific than that. Someone asked if there's a limit per person on the number of alcoholic beverage they can take. No, just has to be served with food. I think we've answered these. Oh, here's one. So are we responsible if it is properly labeled and sealed when they leave, but the customer gets in their car, they remove the tamper-proof seal and start to consume in the car? Is a restaurant responsible in that?
No, that doesn't fall back on a restaurant, and that's essentially why the law is written the way it is. You guys' first responsibility is to make sure that it was sealed in a manner so it's clear that if the customer broke that seal and decided to open it, right, it wasn't on the restaurant. So that's why, scenarios where we just put a piece of Scotch tape over the lid, I mean, that's why we don't consider that to be compliant, right? Because someone could just, unpeel the Scotch tape and then put it back. That in and of itself, right, it doesn't meet the letter of the law and the intent, right? For us to be able to see that you guys attempted to seal it, then there should be evidence, right? Something where the tape breaks kind of thing. That's why they use the term tamper-proof tape, because it's designed once broken to show that it was sealed once and that it was an effort on the end user's part, the consumer, to break that alcohol, the seal to get into the alcohol.
Perfect. All right, keep going, Josh. I'll keep.
Perfect. All right. So, and I know we've talked about, kind of some of this, again, this is just kind of reiteration here. Improperly labeled containers, or, containers that don't state that there's alcohol and doesn't have, the business supplying the alcohol. And then, in terms of improperly sealed containers, got into a little bit of this. Either it has shrink wrap, tamper-proof, evident tape, mechanically sealed. So, a cup with a removable lid, wouldn't suffice. A straw that's inserted into a cup and just merely taped down with some Scotch tape. All of those would be examples of improperly sealed containers. Again here, just, a few pictures that we got. And I will say as a disclaimer, these aren't necessarily pictures that came from any businesses here in Texas and are just merely, kind of stock photos for us to, kind of go over as examples, for the presentation. So if you look at this first photo, again, I wouldn't consider that to be tamper-proof tape. Right. So even though it says daiquiris on it, I think somebody asked a very good question about that. Again, there's wine daiquiris, there's, distilled spirit daiquiris, there's alcohol-less daiquiris. And so I wouldn't say that necessarily indicates that it's alcohol in there. And I wouldn't, consider the packaging of that to be compliant either. And so if you look at the second on the top row there, that tape could be tamper proof. I'm not sure. Some tape like that, if you try to tear it off or whatever, or unpeel it, it ends up ripping, so that you can tell that it's torn. But what I will point out is that it's pretty much just taping the lid on one side. And the straw hole is obviously open there. So I would consider this an improperly sealed package, because a customer could just take that and stick a straw in it, and we wouldn't know, right? And then, the next picture here, we've got a couple of pouches here. Even though a straw is included, if you look at the pouches there, they're designed in a way that you can't just, stick the straw somewhere in it, because you got to tear that pouch open. There's like a zipper lock there, that would require, someone to rip that first part off of it, the top part, in order to then unlock the zipper part to put the straw in. So something like that, as long as it was labeled properly, could be seen as a proper packaging. And then fourth there, you'll see, this is basically just, I know the picture is kind of wide, but this was a cup, a margarita cup, and a styrofoam cup that did not have tape, but instead was put in a bag. And the way that they sealed it was just, putting a knot in the top of the bag, right? And so if the consumer's savvy enough, I could just, get that knot loose, take a couple sips, put it back in the bag, right? So we would consider this improper packaging as well, because, again, the intent behind the tamper-proof packaging requirement is that we want to be able to see if it was the consumer that initiated, the breaking of the package. And then the next two are pretty much the same here. Is just an example of, actual tamper-proof tape that has alcoholic beverage on it. I know it says secured, but, in a perfect world, if the business name was there, it has the term alcoholic beverage on it. It has the bottle tape to it. And if you try to rip that tape off, it's going to rip through the wording in the tape. And so we're going to know at that point that it was a consumer, that broke the tape, and it was actually secured. So we would consider that, proper packaging. And the same on the others, where there's just a restaurant that thought this was funny because they sealed everything. So food included, which is not required on the food side. But again, that the point is that they're using tamper-proof tape. So as long as you got the tamper-proof tape, you got the name of the business, and you got the fact that it says alcohol, that's what we're looking for in a properly sealed and packaged to go out alcoholic beverage.
And I'll just jump in real fast, Josh, and say most of these can be cured pretty easily, right? So the rules are pretty specific, but they're not meant to be expensive or cumbersome, etc. So like the bag example, all you need is to put a zip tie or staples, although I don't know how well a plastic bag staples, but right, it's you can get a staple gun pretty easily. The tape situation, I think the key is making sure you're using the right tape and putting it in the right places, right? That second example, pretty easy to see. You can just flip open that lid on the other side, or Josh's point, stick the straw in the hole and then close it again, and you'd never know, right? So that's always the test, is sort of think about, if a cop pulled someone over, would they be able to tell if the customer had opened the beverage? If yes, you're probably good. If no, you're probably not good, right? That's kind of the practical application.
Yep. Very good points, Kelsey. And I do just want to add to that as well. There's always going to be ways for people to be creative and cheating the system. I mean, we all know that, right? So to the degree that you guys can try your best to properly package it, and you have a consistent process in place, maybe something in writing, that your employees can see. We have an established policy in place in terms of how we're going to package the alcohol, right? So in the event where I'm just thinking like, you put a zip tie on it, well, if they cut the zip tie off and throw it away, there's no evidence, right, that there was ever a zip tie on it. And so that's why we would, basically conduct our investigation, before. We're not just going to look at the packaging and then go writing tickets, right? We're going to ask questions and try to, find out if there's a consistent practice for how you guys are properly packaging it. And so I also just want to share that with y'all. I mean, I know that, no matter how hard we try, right, people can find ways, to break the law, to break the packaging or what have you. And, we don't want that or you guys to come away from this meeting, thinking that, it's always 100% going to fall back on you guys. But we just want to make sure that you are aware of what to do and that you got consistent practices in place. So if we don't have any questions, Kelsey, we'll move on.
We do, but let's keep going and I'll do another batch in a bit.
Perfect. All right. So in terms of, consumers, picking alcohol up, this isn't delivery. This is, customer either calls it in or, goes online and purchases it. And then, they're going to the retailer location to get the alcohol. Law says that the business can, provide that alcohol on the premise or, nearby location. And so we've got a parentheses here so that we don't misinterpret what the nearby location means. And so that doesn't mean, if the permit holder has a warehouse or, some other, business location down the road at a different address, that they can go deliver it there. This is intended for the most part to be on the business premise, but, a parking lot or, curbside or some kind of adjacent parking lot there where those are set up intentionally would suffice there in terms of location that the alcohol can be picked up. Obviously, the recipient has to be 21 years or older and not intoxicated. And again, the person who picks up or delivers an alcoholic beverage that's in a tamper-proof container cannot transport it in a passenger area of a motor vehicle. I know that this has, been a kind of a contentious point in the past about whose responsibility is it to ensure that the alcohol is not in the passenger area. And I will say that responsibility does not fall on the restaurant, despite, again, what, kind of some of the, kind of remarks that we've received or questions that we've gotten in the past. Obviously, I go back to my initial comment that, it's all of our responsibility, right, to ensure safe alcohol service and, to, promote, safety for our Texans, right? So I would say that y'all's responsibility, probably ends with just, trying to educate the public as you're selling alcohol to go, or if there's questions about it, you guys just need to be able to tell them that the law, basically requires that, the alcohol is not, being transported in the passenger area. And, to kind of help us, get the education to those consumers. Obviously they should find somewhere, a trunk or, cargo area, somewhere in the vehicle that doesn't appear that they have access, to the alcohol, right, while they're driving. And so, that's just some education there. And then in terms of completing the transaction, as I mentioned earlier, the recipient, whether it's being delivered or whether they're picking it up, has to sign a receipt acknowledging, that they've received the alcohol. And, if the customer picks up an order in a restaurant, we also want you guys to be aware of this, because this is another issue, that we've come across during our operations. We've kind of become accustomed to the, food ordering process where, for ease and convenience, efficiency, folks, restaurants will allow people to order food online. They'll make those orders, put the name on it and set it on a rack or shelf, something like that. So when the customer comes in, it's already been paid for, they find their name, they pick it up. That works if it's just exclusively food. But if they're, ordering food and that food order has alcohol in it, then that process is not going to work, because the law requires that there be, some acknowledgement, right? And, responsibility to ensure that the consumer recipient is not a minor, they're not under 21, and they're not intoxicated. So that means that, restaurants cannot just leave orders that have alcohol out for the customer to just walk up and retrieve the product without ever having to interact with an employee there. And then again, the restaurant is required to retain those receipts, even if it's signed electronically on a software app or what have you. The time frame for retaining those documents is 6 months following the transaction. And those need to be available, upon request. If we get into a situation where we're having to investigate an order that was purchased there, then, we need to be able to have access to those records up to 6 months.
Hey, Josh, we've got some good questions on this slide, if you don't
Sure.
mind. Couple questions about the location situation. So one person asked, do our employees have to put the alcohol to go in the trunk?
No. Again, that's not the responsibility of the retailer. It is the responsibility of the consumer to make
Agreed.
sure. Yeah.
Someone asked, does the restaurant have any liability if they sell drinks that can't be put in the trunk without spilling? Again, Betsy, I would say that's the consumer's responsibility. As a best practice, I would not have your employees walk alcohol to go to someone's car, just so you don't get in these situations at all. We were very careful in writing this law so that it's the consumer's responsibility where they have the alcohol in their own car, right? That's not an area we want to get into. Josh, anything to add there?
I 100% agree with your comments.
Perfect. Then we've got a couple questions about the documentation.
Okay.
Someone said, so is a signed receipt only indicating the order number and amount paid sufficient when the retailer can look up the order number, which would show what was sold? In other words, does all of the information need to be on the receipt itself, or as long as it's in the restaurant's point of sale system that they can provide to TABC, is that sufficient?
I think that's perfectly sufficient. As long as we can trace the transaction, then yeah, I think we're good.
Okay, we also have someone who asked if the order comes through Uber Eats or another third-party provider, does the Uber Eats driver in that instance, are they the ones that have to sign for the alcohol?
Yes.
But someone, whoever's picking it up, has to sign or acknowledge, right?
That's correct.
Perfect. Okay, I think we can keep going.
All right. Again, and so they got ahead of us here, but this first bullet talks about third parties acting as a permit holder, agent. Again, that driver has to be 21 years old, and deliveries by an employee or an agent of the business of a beer and wine retailers can be 18. Also, you have the option to use a consumer delivery permit holder, and again, their requirements are that they have to be 21. And back to the comment here, a person who picks up or delivers an alcoholic beverage that is in a tamper-proof container may not transport, in a passenger area. Again, it's just a reminder. And we talked about, delivery location. And for those deliveries, the only other thing to add there is if the business is delivering, or if they're hiring an agent to deliver on their behalf, in other words, not using a consumer delivery permit holder, then you need to, confirm and verify that products are being delivered within the county of the retailer, and obviously in an area that's authorized, for the sale of that particular beverage. And delivery times must be during, the retailer's legal hours of sale. And there is some leeway for consumer delivery permit holders to deliver within a reasonable amount of time after leaving the retailer. Now, those are for obvious reasons. If there's multiple orders, and they get an order right before closing, and we're not going to expect them to turn around, with all the food and alcohol, go back to the store. So if it's delivered within a reasonable amount of time, then they're good there as well. Again, for delivery, more importantly, for you guys that are, conducting the delivery yourselves with your own employees, or if you're hiring an agent to do it on your behalf, then they cannot just drop the order off at the door. Needs to be delivered to an actual person. And then companies using a software app to take these orders, again, should not make deliveries or offer an option for leave it at the door, similar to what again, what we've kind of established during COVID for the food delivery piece of it. We just need to be more mindful if the orders have alcohol. Recipients cannot be less than 21 or intoxicated. Again, this is just recommendation on having some features in the software app that has the driver or the person dropping the alcohol off, verifying the age of the recipient, those kind of things to just help ensure that you're compliant with not delivering alcohol to a minor. And then we talk, and here's the documentation piece about the signed receipts, acknowledging the delivery to the person, and those again, even if it's in the software, we just need to maintain those for that 6-month period. And there is a responsibilities alcohol delivery course, or TRAD is what we refer to it as, which is similar to the seller server training. And this is for folks delivering alcohol. It's basically an optional online course that they can take that helps to insulate consumer delivery permit holders, or businesses that they're delivering on behalf of. And it's basically just a 1-hour course that's available on our website. And I know that Kelsey, you guys, I believe, also offer it on y'all's site as well. So I don't know if we don't have any questions about that. And then if we have anything else regarding alcohol to go, that's pretty much concluded before we get into some reminders about public safety compliance.
Yeah, Josh, let's jump in with a few more questions if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Sure.
A couple of questions about third-party delivery transactions. So if a third-party delivery company picks up an order from the restaurant, does the restaurant ID the delivery driver?
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Can't hand over alcohol to anyone you haven't verified as 21 or older, right? No matter who they are.
Yep.
Okay. And then are we responsible if a third party company sells to a minor and the restaurant just provided the alcohol to a third party delivery driver who is over 21?
Yeah, and for those CD, which is why it's encouraged to use those CD consumer delivery permit holders, is because the law itself, as Kelsey, transfers that liability to the consumer delivery permit holder. So it's not on the retailer. If you use a third party consumer delivery to make those deliveries and you've verified that they're 21. Then again, once they take it, then they're responsible for that last mile, delivery, and ensuring on their side that they're not delivering to, someone who's intoxicated or under the age of 21.
That's right. So once you fulfill, in other words, you as a business are only responsible for the handoffs that you're doing, right? So once you properly verify someone's age, hand it off to the third party, then the liability is on them to do the same thing when they complete the transaction on their end.
Yep.
Perfect. And then a couple others. What is the limit on alcoholic beverages purchased to go without food? I assume this question is, for beer, wine only businesses.
Right. I hope it is. Yeah, because the other two can't sell to go without food. But for that answer, there is no limit. So the only The only real limit outside of, like the 375 milliliter, size limitation is for sales on premise, right? And I know we didn't really cover that here, but since there's a lot of questions about limitations, I'll just bring this up, right? So you can't sell more than two, drinks to a consumer if they're on premise. Outside of that, they're taking it home. I mean, it's on them, to make sure that, that they're not getting intoxicated while they're sitting in the living room watching football, right? So there's no limitations for the most part on how much alcohol you can sell to go. It's just the size limitation if you're selling, in the original distilled spirit container.
Right. And that makes sense, right? Because you don't know how many people an order is coming in for. You don't know if it's one person who's going to eat and drink all this, or it's for a whole, football watching party, to Josh's point. So that's why the law is not limited in that way. And because when we wrote it, we had that situation in mind. A couple other questions here. How does TABC monitor compliance for alcohol to go?
Yeah, we're simply conducting covert operations. We do some open inspections, and during audits, we'll just double check. I mean, if you've got a food and beverage and you're a mixed beverage, for example, one of the things that we're going to look at as part of that food and beverage audit is, we'll check for compliance as well. Just to make sure that, you guys have policies in place on how you conduct alcohol to go. But then, like I said, we will also, just similar to doing cover underage operations, right? We'll do the same compliance operations to ensure that, those purchases aren't, being, delivered to minors or given to minors. And, you guys are doing or following all the, compliance requirements for labeling and packaging.
Perfect. And then what about for a curbside order? And again, this goes back to the trunk versus the passenger area of a car. For a curbside order where you're handing over the bag to someone at a car, how do you handle that in terms of where to place it?
Again, it's not the responsibility of the restaurant, right, or the retailer to determine where the alcohol goes inside of the vehicle. So at that point, like just my hope would be that, to whatever extent we can, that we're just helping with education, right? On y'all's part, if the question comes up, or if you have an opportunity, we don't want you to get in any arguments, trying to force someone to put alcohol. That's not y'all's responsibility. But again, if we're just working collectively to educate everyone in the industry on how this is supposed to happen, then I would say, that's the extent of, y'all's responsibility. Is if it comes up, just be prepared, be aware, and help us with educating, y'all's customers in that regard.
Agreed. And then one other question here. Does a restaurant's dram shop liability transfer to a third-party delivery company like DoorDash, Uber Eats?
No.
Agreed. Separate entity, you only have the responsibilities over your own transactions, right? All right, I think that's all the questions. Someone, I may have missed the answer, but how many 375 milliliter bottles can be sold to an individual?
There's no limitation on the amount. It's just the size.
Okay. I think for now we've gotten through all the questions, Josh. I know we're short on time. So are there any resources you want to highlight here at the end?
Yeah, sure. For the most part, I mean, we talked about most of this. This is just a reminder about the public safety, type violations that our enforcement agents, those folks are looking for. And, we kind of talked about it, right? Sell to minors, intoxicated persons, et cetera. They're also looking for drugs at a licensed location, any other kind of, criminal activity, issues like human trafficking, and then, breaches of peace, which you guys are well aware of. And then obviously, we don't have to go over too much of this, but some tips to avoid, selling to minors or whatever is, again, requiring staff to check IDs. If the person looks like they're under 21, it's important to note, Texas law doesn't require businesses to check IDs, but it's the only way for you guys to protect your businesses and ensure that, we aren't selling to minors. And then obviously, when you are checking the IDs, and you guys are given, fake IDs, there's, some tips here for recognizing those, feel for imperfections, ask questions, etc. But again, if you're provided a fake ID that looks like, it could be legitimate, then, you guys don't have any liability there, or we don't consider that a violation as long as you're, following due diligence there to check the IDs. And then in terms of resources here, obviously we have our online AIM system that hopefully all of you are aware of and, have, gotten into and gotten familiar with. And these are just some of the things here, that you can use AIMS for now. And, pretty soon we'll be implementing and transferring over all of our cash and credit law functionality there at some point, to where, we can manage and view cash credit law violations, et cetera. So that's just a website there that we're providing for you. And then, just a couple of slides here on where to go, to get guides. You got laws and regulations page there where you can get information on our industry guidance page, access to our marketing advisories. There's a page dedicated to Alcohol to Go that has a lot of this information that we've gone over today. That's there, as well as any legislative updates and other helpful information. And so again, if you need to get in contact, if you have specific questions, we encourage you to contact your local TABC offices. If you don't know the number, then there's a way that you can access that through our website, the contact us link, and you'll be able to get information. And we really look forward to, again, just continuing to work with you guys. We want to get this right, to Kelsey's point, make sure that, that we don't take for granted the opportunities that we have now for, permanent alcohol to go sales. And we just want to be a resource for you all. So that, Kelsey, concludes my presentation, subject to any other last questions that we have.
Wonderful. We almost did that in the hour. I'm pretty impressed. So Josh, thank you so much. Really wonderful job. You answered a ton of questions on the fly. And we're getting a lot of thanks and kudos in the chat. So I can tell it was really helpful to folks. As I said, we will send an email to everyone who registered for this webinar with the recording, as well as some one-pagers. Also a great question about putting some resources in Spanish, which we can work on. Josh, does TABC have Spanish resources on y'all's website?
It's something that I believe we're still kind of trying to work on. We're aware that, it will be helpful to do that. And so I'll definitely pass that message along and see if we can assist with, getting some of that material out there in Spanish.
Perfect. And we'll work to translate our one-pagers in Spanish too. I don't think that'll be too difficult. In the meantime, thank you again for everyone who joined. If you're not a member of the TRA or you're not sure if you're a member, please reach out to us. We'd love to get you set up and confirmed. And again, we provide resources like this on a weekly, if not monthly basis. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to Josh and our friends at the TABC. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much.